I know people are still gathering in the room, but let's begin. Once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those of you I have not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Lena Dobreer. I'm the Director of Operations at Opus Connect. We cater to lower middle market M&A transactional professionals. So membership-based private equity firms, investment bankers, lenders, independent sponsors. We do a number of events throughout the year. I think last year we did 350 events virtually. This year we're returning with hybrid, so we'll be doing a couple in person where it's safe and keeping a lot of it virtual as well. If you're interested in learning more about us, who we are, how we can help, feel free to reach out to my colleague, Swayze Yancey. His contact information is below, or anyone on the Opus Connect team will be happy to guide you in the right direction. Today we will be taking Q&A. So as questions come to mind, excuse me, I will ask that you refrain from using the chat function, but utilize the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and submit your questions there. Our moderator will be monitoring those. Always a tongue twister for me. And we'll try to get to as many as possible. These events would not be possible without the support of our sponsors today. Plante Moran is our one and only sponsor. Jerry Luebbers of Plante Moran is going to be moderating today, so we'll wait until we introduce him to learn a bit more about their firm, but I want to shout you guys out and thank you for your continued support and partnership. Before we do begin, we have a poll question we'd like to ask, just to give our panelists an idea of who they're speaking to. So go ahead and let us know who you are. Are you an independent sponsor, investment banker, capital provider on the debt or equity side? Give us a shout, let us know. We'll give it 20 seconds and we'll move on. Don't be shy. Okay. People still hopping on here. Let us know who you are. All right. So it looks like 7% independent sponsor, 50% investment bankers, 14% on the capital provider side, equity side, 21% service provider, and 7% other. Thank you all for participating in that. We're going to be discussing today healthcare investing in the M&A market. So I'm going to kick it over to today's moderator, Jerry Luebbers of Plante Moran. He's done a few of these now, so I think it's kind of second nature. But Jerry, I'll step out, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Lena, and thanks again. We've got a great panel together this morning, and we're excited to be with you all. I'm Jerry Luebbers. I'm a partner in Plante Moran's Transaction Advisory Services practice. For those of you that aren't familiar with Plante Moran, we're one of the largest accounting consulting firms in the country. We have more than 3,100 staff across the Great Lakes region and Rocky Mountain region, serving private equity, more than 1,500 private equity firms and their portfolio companies. I focus in healthcare, and so it's a topic that I'm very passionate about and excited to have a wonderful group of panelists, and I think it'll make for an interesting discussion. So with that, we're going to start with some introductions of our panel, and Erik, I think we're going to start with you. So why don't you go ahead and give us a little background on yourself. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it. So quick background. I'm a partner in a healthcare and life sciences investment bank, PH Partners. We're headquartered out of Austin, Texas. We've got offices in Houston, New York, and Seattle as well. We focus kind of on mid-market deals. We are predominantly, I would sort of say, technology focused in the space. So You're not going to see us typically rolling up practices or in the service space. We certainly do deals in that space, but that's not really where we focus. So we tend to cover the other verticals, so therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, and digital health. We work with companies raising capital anywhere from Series A all the way up to public financings, and then buy side and sell side transactions, and a lot of strategic partnerships with kind of the 800-pound gorillas in the device, diagnostic, and therapeutic space for our clients. So that's us.
Thanks, Erik. And Isaac, you want to?
So thanks, Jerry. So I'm an investor at ArchiMed. We are a US European healthcare focused private equity fund. So much like Erik, care services is not our specialty. We're looking at the healthcare industries, so medical device, biopharma, and so on. And I'm one of the sector leads in our life science practice. So looking at everything drug discovery, development related for advanced therapeutic modalities. In terms of background, I was a medical student and then moved into the sort of financing side of healthcare. Worked in VC in gene editing for a while, helped a small biotech company raise some money, and then spent the last 3 years in Lyon, which is where ArchiMed's headquartered. And then in Jan 21, moved to New York to help start up our activities in the US. So very happy to be part of the panel.
Great, thanks, Isaac. And Jared?
Hi, everyone. Jared Benke here, founding and managing partner at Transitus Capital. We're a middle market investment bank. Unlike Isaac and Erik, we do focus on the care side. We've fortunately been very successful in helping clients across a range of verticals on the services side, particularly in dental care. We're like I said, investment bank based here in Dallas. We're now, I guess, going on our 8th year and spend roughly half our time in the healthcare space. So it's a space that we're excited about and spend a lot of time.
Thanks, Jared. And last but not least, Phil, if you could share a little background on yourself.
Sure. Thanks for saying not least, by the way. So I'm Phil Curatillo. I'm with Seacoast Capital, headquartered outside of Boston. I'm in Connecticut. We also have a San Francisco office. We've been around for 28 years, and our claim to fame is that we are non-control investors. We don't want to buy companies. We're actually investing in businesses where the owners believe there's plenty of runway left in them, and they end up keeping control after we invest. So 28 years, 4 funds, we have done 82 of these non-control investments, by the way, which are not in support of traditional private equity buyouts. We are the sponsor, we just happen to be in a minority position. So we're providing capital for companies who need capital for growth, buying out a partner, make an acquisition, liquidity certainly, et cetera. And we're investing sub-debt preferred and common all out of one fund, current fund. Our 4th is a $263 million vehicle, which we're about 65% invested. We are industry agnostic, but about 25% of our dollars deployed in the last 2 funds have been in healthcare, primarily on the services side. We invested in Peak Performance for Men, a multi-location men's health business last year. We invested in SkinCure, which is a turnkey alternative solution that is co-located with the dermatologists, providing an alternative to the more invasive treatment for non-melanoma skin cancer. We exited a couple of businesses healthcare businesses over the last year or so. Right Time, which was a 20-location urgent care business, sold to a strategic of similar size. Walden Behavioral Health, which was the largest behavioral health company on the East Coast, focused on eating disorders. And we're one of the earlier investors in Aspen Dental. So I've joked with the panelists on our last call that probably our biggest mistake was getting out of that one too early, since they've done quite well. And we're investing $5 to $25 million per deal in companies that are anywhere from 2 to about 18 million of EBITDA. We're an SBIC, so there are some size limitations, not to mention geographic, so we're focused on the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And as a, thinking back over 2021, we definitely had the most busiest Q4 of record. And as we shift into 2022, while we're not at the same pace from a deal flow perspective, and part of that is just the managed capacity for the most part. Curious, what you guys are seeing currently. Are you seeing as much activity as you in Q4, in Q1 as you did in Q4? And Isaac, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think 2020 was surprising for us in terms of sort of deal flow and deal volume. What I would say is that in Q4, probably a lot of the companies we were seeing in the sectors we focus in were companies that had really benefited through the pandemic. So thinking about areas like supply chain, consumables, diagnostics. So a lot of these companies had seen a real peak and were looking to capitalize on that. I think a lot of the companies that we're seeing in Q1 are sort of turning that corner of the page. Companies that have been more resilient, that have been, have kept good relationships with customers and suppliers, that have good stickiness and are starting to sort of bounce back from COVID. So we're seeing a different kind of deal. In terms of deal volume, it's still very exciting for us. I think those are probably the key things we're seeing.
Jared, how about you on the investment banking side?
Yeah, on the investment banking side, we're a little surprised that we're seeing as every bit as much interest from business owners and practitioners in going into 22 as we've seen for the last, call it 18 months. Obviously, when the pandemic first struck, particularly here, obviously in the US, we shut down most of that industry. Literally, practices were not allowed to open for roughly 2 months in most modalities. But what we found was those businesses bounced back quite well, almost immediately. And so the last 18 months have been very busy. We anticipated 22 being slower than it appears to be. We felt like there was obviously a backlog of things that wanted to get done previously that were able to get done last year. And we also felt like there was an acceleration of some things as people were worried about cap gains tax treatment, things of that nature, and felt like there might be something of a void, but we're seeing every bit as much interest. We have 2 new clients we're going to be launching in the next month and a half. So we're thrilled with that, but certainly surprised by it.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Jared. And Phil, how about on your side?
Well, certainly we're still a little still young as far as Q1 goes, right? Interesting thing about our deal flow, again, we're non-control guys. So our deal flow doesn't tend to track buyout deal flow. As a matter of fact, in markets where valuations are very, very high and M&A volumes are even higher, that takes away from our opportunities. The owners that we invest alongside believe that they have growth opportunities, but frankly, we're not losing deals to firms that do what we do, because frankly, there's not a lot of them, especially that are doing unsponsored minority deals. But we're losing opportunities to buyout shops who are paying 8, 9, 10 or more times, and owners saying, well, heck, if I even have a 5-year period for when I'm going to sell, I might as well do it now while the going's good. So our deal flow is actually down. So if you compare annually, 2020 was a great year for us, right? Q3 2020 was the biggest quarter that we had deal flow wise since we started tracking data. And when you think about 2020, with essentially half of March, all of April, and all of May shut down, we had a 19% increase in 2020 over 2019. Our deal flow last year was down about 25% compared to that big gangbuster year. So and we're seeing okay deal flow right now. And again, we're industry agnostic, so that's across industries. We are looking at a couple of healthcare opportunities right now, but I think for our model, the non-control junior capital, if you will, model, deal flow has been down more recently.
Okay, and Phil, thanks for sharing, because I think when as professionals in this industry, we don't always there's situations where there's different niches, and I don't think we always have a full appreciation for the different niches that exist. And so, yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Background on activities over the last couple of years. Erik?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I don't want to reiterate things other folks have said. I mean, I agree with Isaac that I think, and we'll get into some of the trends in hot areas, but I think, in the pharma services side of things, whether it's manufacturing or tools and things, the pharma industry obviously had a pretty banner year if you had anything COVID related for the last couple of years. And so I think all of those industries kind of supporting that got a huge lift over the last 18 months. And so we've seen a lot of deal flow in that space. I think where we've seen, and again, our deal flow has gone up and up. I mean, our firm is more than doubled in size in the last 18 months to kind of handle it. So that's a good problem to have. I do think that, some of these have shifted, right? So when you look at what's kind of happened with the IPO market recently, we had a number of clients where we were doing sort of bridge to IPO, and that's become a bridge to nowhere. And so you don't want to build that necessarily. So there's been a little bit of pivoting into different, a transaction started as one thing and now it's turning into something else. But it hasn't decrease the deal flow from our perspective. It's just shifted what we thought maybe the deal was originally to something different.
Thanks, Erik. Yeah, we always have to be flexible in this market, and yeah, I don't see that changing. And so thanks for sharing that, Erik. I think we want to do another poll question. With the Omicron variant, again, the change has caused us to certainly modify how we approach kind of work for our day at Plante Moran. Curious, and Lena and Phoebe, if we could present this poll question.
Yes.
On
management meetings,
whether we're holding them in person, virtual, or we're still a mix.
Give it just a few seconds here. I see people submitting responses.
Great, and while they're doing that, maybe we'll go right into the next topic here. So with this kind of deal volume, depending on how you present yourself in the marketplace, and shifting from 2021 into 2022. Has what we've experienced over the last couple of years, okay, I don't think that's a surprise. Well, I guess I'm a little surprised that we don't have any in person, but the virtual hybrid mix, I guess, makes sense. But Jared, I want to maybe start with you here.
Sure.
Have you guys changed how your approach to working with management teams, capital providers, and
I think what has happened is we've had some tools that have evolved that, while not necessarily good replacements for example, in-person meetings, have definitely turned out to be really helpful tools relative to perhaps phone calls. And so in processes, I saw that there was no exclusively in person, but there was a majority of hybrid, and that's exactly what we're seeing. I think things like this, where you're able to bring people together relatively easily, I think there's a lot more value that's generated from that type of engagement than a traditional conference call. And everybody now has webcams all over the place so that they can accommodate things like this, and has become accustomed to it. And so it's become a lot easier for people to really get value out of some of these tools. But at the same time, in-person meetings at the end of the day are critical, particularly when you're getting to the later stages of a transaction. That interpersonal fit that exists, particularly when a seller's not selling 100% and they're going to retain some level of ownership or some level of activity or involvement, is really, really important. And I don't think you can get that from a virtual meeting. So I think, what we're seeing from the poll responses that I saw had popped up is exactly what we're seeing. People taking advantage of some tools that were used as a replacement that was a necessity, and now are really being used to augment what used to be the normal, and has kind of evolved to a new normal.
Thanks, Jared. Phil, I guess with your model, does your approach differ, and has it changed with kind of where we are today?
Certainly, we're doing fewer in-person board meetings with portfolio companies. But at the end of the day, especially when you're in a non-controlling position, you really have to be able to look the owner and the management team in the eyes, make sure you're going to be good partners, make sure you trust them, because there's only so many levers you can switch on should things go south, right? So it's important to us to get a sense for that very, very early on in the transaction. We joke about not needing the practice anymore, right? Let's spend our time on opportunities where there is a high probability of close. And part of that is just, can we get along? So we certainly have more virtual board meetings, but we try and, when we can, have in-person meetings, because the thing that you really lose, not surprisingly, from virtual is the ability to really team build, to socialize after the meeting. You go out to the restaurant, you have dinner, you're rubbing elbows, even if you're masked. All of that is really important and part of a longer term, 3, 4, 5 year hold investment.
Yeah, Phil, thanks. And, just recently, we actually did an in-person site visit in the last week, and we felt it was important because the complexity of the deal and some of the issues that we knew we were going to encounter, not issues that would be, deal breaker type issues, but just, the complexity of the business and understanding the business and really getting the management team's devoted attention, if you will. And so, and at the same time, making sure that, we've got all the protocols in place and it's a safe environment. But I agree.
Yeah, and to be clear, we would never make an investment without visiting the business, right? So at some point, you may be not able to visit, and we've had to find some creative ways to meet the management team. We closed an investment in Virginia, and we sourced the deal, and we're evaluating it right in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. And we drove from Boston and Connecticut to a golf course in New Jersey. The management team drove up from Virginia to New Jersey. We had a meeting fully socially distanced out on the veranda of the golf course, and had an elbow shake on a deal 3 or 4 hours later that we ultimately closed. Now, as we got closer, we had to visit, right? This is a multi-location business. We needed to make sure it wasn't a Z-Best, for those of you old enough to know what that is, that it was a real business with as many locations as they purported. So that was a challenge, but it's something that we had to do and wouldn't simply pass on. We would delay the close, then close the business without making sure that that was all in order.
And Jerry, you're muted,
Yeah,
but yeah,
thank you.
I was gonna comment,
There's
Jerry.
always one.
Yeah, well, I was gonna comment, Jerry, to your comment about meeting with the client last week. Obviously, everyone wants to be as safe and careful as possible, but at the same time, we're coming up on 2 years, and people are craving the opportunity to interact in person, and so. They're not just, obviously it's a preferred means, it's where you can obviously generate rapport and team building and all of those things, but just the void of it over the last 18 to 24 months has created a situation where people really want to have those opportunities where they can.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been greatly missed and an important part of the process for sure. See, I think Erik.
Yeah, I mean,
Sarah?
yeah, I mean, I think the only quick thought I have on this is, I think there's, sort of bottom up deals and top down deals, right? And so, so we've got a transaction going with a major, international pharma company, which means there's, 20 to 30 people on their side in diligence and in the data room spread out over 10 countries around the world, right? Like that deal was always going to be virtual. It doesn't matter COVID or not to get 90% of the way there to do that deal, right? And I call that top, bottom up, because you got to have the IP folks and the CMC and everybody else has got to kind of check their box before it goes on. But we have another deal right now, which I would call more top down, where it's CEO to CEO for two sort of mid-sized companies that have very complementary technology. These are two CEOs who frankly kind of crossed paths 20 years ago in their careers. They played a little bit of the who do you know game on a Zoom call the other day, and they all knew 20 of the same people and story after story, right? That we got to get those two CEOs together. Like that deal gets done because those two guys like each other and want to work together. So we're pushing for an in-person dinner meeting ASAP. It makes zero sense to get their teams doing kind of the bottom-up analysis if these guys don't want to work together. And so some of it just depends on kind of the type of deal and what makes the most sense, I guess. But 90% are probably virtual or hybrid, and you can get by with that right now.
Thanks, Erik. And Isaac, I guess with your firm being both kind of US and international, I guess, has that changed at all for you?
It's an interesting question. I would say that in terms of in-person meeting practices, we're seeing a lot of the same things in Europe as we are in the US. So I wouldn't say there's a big geographical difference. I think the key difference is exactly what Erik said. It depends on the size and context of deal. So ArchiMed will do ticket sizes anything between 10 million and €1 billion. So the type of deal varies dramatically. And if you're getting towards that bigger size, these are established companies, it's bigger teams. The need for that sort of in-person interaction decreases a bit in importance. When you're getting to the smaller deals, you really need to shake someone by the hand, be aligned in terms of strategic direction. Things like reinvestment roles are critical in smaller companies and smaller deals. So I would probably echo that as the key difference we'd see in necessitating that in-person interaction.
Great, thanks, Isaac. And we want to do another poll question. I mean, in the news, and we've all maybe even experienced some of this around inflation, interest rates, labor shortages and challenges, supply chain challenges. Earlier tax reform was mentioned, and what does that look like going forward? Who knows? So wanted to get the attendees' view on which factor they think here might have the biggest impact on deal activity. And while the attendees are responding, Phil, I want to present this question to you. When we think of innovation and new technologies, what types of business models are you coming across in the marketplace to mitigate some of these economic, policy, and social factors? And Phil, you're on mute.
Sorry. Certainly you have to deal with them. I don't think you can completely do away with, for example, labor shortages. That's a part of our diligence that we have to go through. When we review an opportunity, it's always interesting to look at the hockey stick growth projections, and it all looks good on paper, but how are you going to double the size of your business if you need to increase your workforce by 50%? And, by the way, they're a particular type of worker that is highly sought after and very difficult to convince to switch companies. So, we're looking at, projections aside, how are you going to grow this business? We're investing both debt and equity, right? So cash flow is important to us. How are you going to be able to service that debt and then some in an environment where you're projecting such high need for new employees in a market that's very, very challenging to find them and keep them, right? So that's a real problem. Even if you snap your fingers and the pandemic goes away, you have a whole host of these other issues that are still in place. So we're being a little bit more robust in our analysis, trying to use some technologies that are available in order to do so. We're also looking just across the board at our portcos. And I know we've beaten this virtual issue to death, but the behavioral health company that we sold, this business was 100% bricks and mortar. It was both short and intermediate stay hospitals, as well as a counseling business. And once COVID hit, we realized we were able to pivot that business model, and the counseling business could go 100% virtual. And we actually found patients were more likely to show up for their counseling session via Zoom than if they actually had to get in their car and drive pre-pandemic. So of course, we then reevaluated all the leases that we had in place for the business and significantly decreased that. And as you might imagine, goes right to the bottom line. So that's very, very positive. Also looking at some different things, and we've done a lot, as Jared had, I believe in multi-location healthcare businesses. And the old notion of where you put your next location based on demographics is very, very outdated. You have the technologies to use things like Google Analytics and Google AdWords, where you can identify where people are going online to Google certain types of services and putting up a location, or at least a proximity, based on where the most searches are emanating from. So those are some of the tools that we're trying to use. A lot of it reverts, back to, digital, virtual, and some of that's not going to change. We're not going to go back to 100% in person.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think, telemedicine and models that support telemedicine are going to be key because we're continuing to see more deals in that space. Let's see, Erik, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of leverage off of the telemedicine, I think, when we talk about kind of upcoming trends and things, obviously, I think that's going to continue, things around, remote patient care, remote patient monitoring, tele-diagnostics, anything really, I think is here to stay and will continue to be a growth market. The one caution I have, and we have this as a firm, there's a lot of that out there, right? There's just a ton of it out there. And so sifting through the noise to figure out what's real can be challenging. And so, a lot of what we look for and a lot of what we coach entrepreneurs on is, you can sell me the dream all day of how you're going to take cost out of healthcare and do that stuff, but show me. And, like when I do therapeutics deals, they have data, like, if you have this disease and you don't have my drug, this is what it looks like. You have my drug, this is what you look like, right? But digital health companies by and large don't really do that, like that before and after, that sort of positive and negative control and showing traction and showing what the true benefit of their platform is. Because the reality is there's rarely a moat or barriers to entry for their technology. And so you've got to show differentiation, you've got to show traction. So I think it's here to stay, but again, a lot of noise and a lot of things you got to sift through to see, what's real.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. And I think we did get the attendees poll responses back, and I think I saw that inflation and interest rates were maybe interest rates first and then inflation second were the two things that two factors that they feel could have the biggest impact on deal activity. And certainly rising costs are always a concern, as is rising interest rates on debt. So yeah, definitely two areas that we'll be watching closely over the next few months here. Isaac, anything to add from the types of models that you guys are seeing, innovative technology?
Yeah, I think when I think about our portfolio, which has a kind of very broad exposure to different sectors of healthcare, I think the two key challenges we're facing are things that the panel's already commented on. The first being labor shortages, and the second probably being sort of, I think telemedicine is a sector, but a lot of our companies are not telemedicine companies. So thinking about how they can be data enabled. And, to give an example of that, one of our companies is manufacturing ECG equipment out of Italy, and they've sort of been able to expand to a cloud-based analytical solution. We have companies operating in the healthcare logistics space who are now offering customers the ability to have much more precise tracking and analytics in a remote way. So I think, a lot of companies that we look at are not telemedicine, would not be strictly defined as telemedicine, but thinking about data enablement across our portfolio, I think has been important. That's been one of our responses. It's been one of the ways that we've tried to help our portfolio companies. And I think the other part is the labor shortages. And that's been, I think, the key issue we face, getting skilled employees in to support the growth of our companies. And I think it comes down to sort of basic things we think about, ensuring that salaries and investment reinvestment opportunities are market competitive. But I think one of the other things we've had success with is things like remote working, making sure that's available across all of our portfolio companies, even the CROs, CDMOs that are quite brick and mortar, and investing in that, not just making it available, but putting in cybersecurity measures, investing in technologies to facilitate that for the employees of our portcos, I think has really helped. So they're probably two of the things that we're implementing the most across our portfolio.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a focus on to address the labor shortages, a focus on automation. Where can we benefit from automation? But then also healthcare staffing firms. They've certainly become in kind of high demand here over the last, they've been out there for the last several years, but we're seeing more deals in the staffing space for sure. Jared, anything to add there?
No, I don't have anything to add. We're seeing a lot of the same types of themes and challenges across the market.
Great. Moving on to the next topic here, and really kind of focusing on 2022 and the areas that we feel are going to be hot, and areas that as professionals in this space we want to be focused on or cognizant of, where we feel like where we can add the most value kind of across the care continuum. And Isaac, let's start with you.
Sure. I actually read an interesting report that I'd recommend to everybody from McKinsey on the business models defining the future of healthcare last week, which I thought was good. And I think the areas that I talk about, Erik will also mention, but be able to describe them in a much more succinct way. But I think that the key areas we're kind of thinking about, specifically in the life sciences team, which is where I focus most of our times, novel biologic modalities. Everyone's talking about mRNA, but what's the next frontier? I think the rapid speed at which that modality has gained clinical acceptance has been remarkable for everyone involved in clinical trial design, implementation, and commercialization. So thinking past mRNA, which is now a super hot market, everybody wants a piece of it. What comes next now that we can see that we can push, new modalities to the clinic very quickly? That's one thing we're thinking about. And generally, the use of data to optimize the discovery, development, and commercialization processes. Thinking across operations, things like manufacturing, quality, supply chain, all the way through to leveraging data in discovery processes. I think data driven decision making in clinical development is going to be key for us, and we're looking at a lot of targets in that space right now. I'll probably hand it over to Erik there to add some good detail.
Thanks, Isaac. And I think, Jared, I want to kind of shift this question over to you. What are you seeing 2022? I know you're focused in services.
Yeah, I'd love to have some really shiny, amazing answer, but honestly, it's much more of the same. I think certainly there was a lot of folks taking a pause, but on the services side, and for a lot of the PE who have been pursuing roll-up strategies across a whole range of service verticals, they're reinvigorated. I think if anything, they have models that have been very, very resilient through some pretty unprecedented circumstances. And so it's reinforced their views on these models that they don't have cyclicality, that they're relatively unaffected by broader issues that affect other industries or even within healthcare, other segments of healthcare. And so we're seeing every bit as much enthusiasm, probably not what Phil wants to hear, because we're seeing valuations that are still very aggressive. We're seeing not only individual players being aggressive in valuation, but every bit as deep and broad a field of buyers as we've ever seen.
Phil, does that, I guess, when you think of kind of you mentioned it earlier, how when we've got strong deal volume and high multiples, how that, your model, is, maybe doesn't, excel in that type of environment. But when you think of kind of where you guys are in your niche and thinking ahead here in 2022, are there sectors in healthcare that you get excited about because they kind of do fit that model?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I see these questions, we're not hedge fund managers here. We're not managing for the quarter, right? Our average hold in our last fund was a little over 4 years. And, we invest, again, both debt and equity. And based on our structuring of these deals, valuation doesn't always come to the fore, right? By structuring creatively with some sub debt and preferred and maybe an equity promote on the part of the management team and an MBO, of an inactive owner, that math can work, and we can make that deal transact. We're really bottoms up investors here. We're looking for good, solid companies, regardless of sector. Now, there's certain things we stay away from, of course. As an SBIC, there's certain things we have to stay away from. But then there's certain things we stay away from by choice. Sometimes that's due to our lack of institutional knowledge. Sometimes it's because of it. When you have some negative institutional memory about a deal that went sour 15 years ago, forget about ever investing in another one in that same subsector. But I think, if you just think where demand is going to come from, again, on the services side, psych, we've looked at a few psych deals, whether it be bricks and mortar hospitals, or the services business, certainly healthcare IT. To Erik's point, there's a lot of that stuff out there, so it's hard to break through the noise, right? But, we're not looking for the next 10 bagger. That's not our model. We're not in the proof of concept business. Based on our ability to structure with debt and equity, we can make a pretty nice living on a 5 to 10% grower over, annually over the course of our investment. So again, we tend to be more bottoms up focused than we are subsector focused.
Thanks, Phil. And Erik, maybe before I get your points, I do for the attendees audience, if you've got any questions, we're going to have a few minutes here at the end. We've got up till 12:30 Eastern. So if anyone has any questions they'd like to propose to the panel, by all means, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A icon, if you will, to do that. So Erik, bring us home here.
Yeah, Rio. So I love being on a panel like this, because I think where Phil and Jared sit is definitely a different space than where Isaac and I probably tend to play. But so I think it's great to get the perspectives of kind of, both sides of that and how the markets are affecting both. So this is, I just really enjoyed the conversation anyway. To kind of give, I do spend a lot of time on the bright, shiny objects that are a little bit further away from revenue generating at times, and certainly a little riskier. But I'll give you a bright, shiny object trend and something a little bit, sort of straighter down the middle of the fairway, I guess. So, I talked a little bit about the telehealth, part of that. I think that's going to be here to stay, and the remote stuff. And we talked about that. I think, finding differentiation there is going to be important. And again, kind of in that pharma services and manufacturing side of things, I think you're going to continue to see a lot of opportunities there. If anything, from a vaccine manufacturing, DNA manufacturing, cellular therapy is still all the rage. Now we're shifting from CAR T to NK and other kinds of really cool cells, bright, shiny objects. But at the end of the day, cellular manufacturing, figuring out how to do it cheaper, better, faster, and distribute it, frankly, globally is still, if you got technology or business models in that space, that's going to resonate for sure for us. And, again, kind of shifting back to the bright, shiny object, AI and drug discovery. So AI is a buzzword for sure, figuring out what's real and what's not. But pharma companies are constantly looking for, if you can help me discover a drug better, faster, cheaper, bring it to market, they're all for it. And, AI companies are, by definition, typically low capital required. It can be two guys in a garage. If you got a good enough algorithm, I don't recommend investing in the two guys in the garage necessarily, but you can kind of do that. But let me just give you a couple of numbers in kind of the AI drug discovery space. Exscientia just inked a deal with Sanofi for up to $5 billion for accessing their AI platform. They also did a deal, same platform, with BMS for $1.2 billion, same company. Amgen recently did a deal with Generate Biomed for $1.9 billion. And Recursion Pharma, which is sort of a darling in the space, has, I think, 6 different pharma companies that are paying them buku dollars to access those platforms. And that's just 3. There's a bunch of them out here. So that's a hot area. Again, it's getting to be a noisy area, but there's certainly plenty of money and need in that drug development space.
Thanks, Erik. Yeah, I want to echo Erik's comments. I've really enjoyed, hearing your stories because we've got a great mix of panelists here that touch different sectors in healthcare and different niches. So I've had a lot of fun with you all this morning. We've got a question here from the audience from James Redpath. What leverage levels are you seeing in deals? So like, over the last, I guess, few months here, what are we seeing? And if anyone wants to, I don't know, Jared, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I think people are becoming, we're seeing some haircutting of the use of leverage, mostly because obviously a lot of that is adjustable, and there's some pretty reasonable expectation that that's going to become more and more expensive. And so we're seeing more caution with respect to leverage than maybe we saw, call it 3 years ago, but not dramatically so. At the end of the day, I think a lot of these investing models really require a certain amount of leverage to hit targets that they have in mind and have pitched to their LPs, and so they're trying to strike a careful balance between those two objectives.
I get, yeah, anyone, Isaac, and I don't know, Phil, I want to definitely get your comments. You might have a different view as well. So go ahead, Isaac.
Yeah, I would just add as well, for me and my experience has been very sector dependent, thinking within healthcare. So areas like, some of the medtech applications, we're seeing a reduced kind of appetite from debt providers to offer a lot of leverage at low prices. But for a lot of our companies in the contract manufacturing and research services sectors, probably, a mix of factors. It might be an increased allocation to healthcare. It's probably related to the strong performance of a lot of companies in that sector. But we've seen a lot of appetite from debt providers to offer rates that were the same as pre-pandemic or lower, and go for some, very creative structures in terms of mezzanine, some convertible elements. Some of them been asking for equity co-investments. So yeah, for us, it's been a very sector specific experience on the debt side.
Yeah, I guess my response would be it's always an interesting question, right? It's like the question comes from a base of, well, how much can I lever up this business? And my response to that is typically, just because a bank is willing to give it to you doesn't mean you should take it, right? Every industry is different. Every company is different. Every owner's appetite for debt is different, as you know. So if they're sticking around and you're going to make them part of a 5x6 deal, they may have something to say about it. We tend to lever our deals as non-control investors, as you might imagine, a little bit less than a buyout shop might in a change of control transaction. We're still trying to solve for companies where total debt through our sub, which would include the senior, is somewhere around 3 times, and through our pref somewhere around 4 times. Now, that isn't to say we haven't closed deals at leverage higher than that. We have, but they're usually in companies that we can delever pretty quickly. So that's always going to come into play. So I think, again, it really depends upon the company. And, the owner has a lot to say about it in a non-controlled deal. So we asked that question very early on. Sometimes the company has no debt. It's a multi-generational family-owned business. They're really allergic to debt. They're concerned about debt. So, that's not a transaction you're going to be able to lever up very high, right? So it's important to know not only the bank's appetite, but also the owner's appetite and your appetite, what you're most comfortable with, and making sure that you're not putting maximum leverage on the business, because you need to have a war chest available for the rainy day. And over the course of a 4 or 5 year hold, there are always some rainy days.
Thank you, Phil. I guess we got a minute or so left. So I think we'll close it out here. Again, thank you all, panelists, for your participation this morning into the early afternoon here in the East. Lena and the Opus Connect team, thanks again for pulling this all together. We really appreciate all your help here. And so I'm gonna turn it over to you, Lena, to take us to the next step.
Yes, thank you guys so much for your time and contributions to today's discussion. And thank you to our audience. We hope you enjoyed it. We will be posting the recording of this webinar to our YouTube in the next 24 hours or so. So stay tuned for a link on that, and feel free to share it with anyone. Again, thank you all for participating, and Jerry and Plante Moran, thank you guys for your partnership and continued sponsorship. We have a bunch of upcoming events. Our next webinar will be on February 3rd, around how the pandemic has transformed the HR function in private equity. A lot of shifts going on with the Great Resignation and firms having issues with retaining talent. So we're going to dive into that a little deeper, followed by our Business Services Deal Connect. So stay tuned. We'll be in touch. But again, thank you all for your time, and stay healthy. We look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.